Good evening. Welcome to the Custom House Maritime Museum's virtual First Friday, where we invite guest speakers and performers to explore topics related to the museum and its collections and exhibits. My name is Sean Palmatier. I'm the Assistant Director and Curator at the Custom House. Before I introduce our program tonight, again, I'd like to speak for a moment about our plans for reopening the museum. The Custom House will reopen to the public on Thursday, July 9th, in accordance with Phase 3 of Massachusetts' phased reopening plan. As such, we'll be in compliance with local, state, and federal guidelines with regard to the health and safety in our daily operating procedures. So what does this mean for us? Well, first, we'll be modifying our weekly hours to a Thursday through Saturday schedule. We'll be open 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Thursday through Saturday and 12 to 4 on Sunday. Admission to the museum will be a timed entry in groups of 6 on the hour, similar to a historic house tour. Guests will have the option of a short tour with time to explore independently or an entirely self-guided experience. Admission tickets to the museum can now be purchased in advance online at tickets.thechmm.org. Newburyport residents are still free with an ID and can reserve tickets in advance on the ticket page. Walk-ins will still be welcome as long as we have not reached capacity for the hour, but since we can't guarantee a spot, we do recommend that you reserve tickets in advance. When you do enter the museum, wearing face masks will be required by staff, volunteers, and guests for everyone's safety. Sanitizing stations and supplies will be available in the museum, and we asked that all guests adhere to a no-touch policy, even if you're wearing gloves. We will be sanitizing handrails, doorknobs, and restrooms regularly throughout the day and between groups for the safety of all. As we are taking these precautionary measures, we ask that you please do not plan to visit if you think you have been exposed or show signs of illness. We can always refund your ticket. On another note, we have recently had our website redesigned and will be launching hopefully in the next few days. Let me show you what that might look like. I'm having technical difficulties. Here we go. So this will be the new website. It looks very good. We're very happy about it. And if you notice at the top of the screen in the menus, if you go across, you can see there's a ticket button. If you click on that, you can go and buy tickets in advance. While you're here, and we're actually having it work on YouTube, we will be hopefully more successfully streaming on YouTube more often, as well as uploading more video content in the channel in the near future. So please give us a like and a subscribe to get all the newer content as we put it up. Now that we've gotten through that, again, for me anyway, I'd like to introduce tonight's guest. Mike Welch is a living history performer, musician, and educator who has worked with the museum as a guest performer at special events, but also as part of our educational outreach program to the local school system. Tonight, Mike will be delivering a talk on the Colonial Tavern and performing some period songs as part of the opening of our new exhibit, Entertainment for Man and Horse, Victuals, Libations, and Distractions in an Early American Tavern. This exhibit focuses on the social role of the local tavern in early American history in places like Newburyport. It features artifacts and historical context related to tavern life in the 18th and 19th century. If you have any questions for Mike during the presentation, please leave them in the chat and we will get to as many as we can at the end. And now without further delay, let's all raise a pint to Mr. Mike Welch.
Well, good evening, everyone. I hope everyone can see me. Working through these technical firsts. There we go. All right, well, welcome everyone. And I want to start off by saying thank you very much to the Customs House in Newburyport for inviting me to put on this presentation. I want to thank you folks for inviting me into your home. This is really kind of a thrill for me. Talking about colonial taverns and singing old colonial songs is a true love of mine. So it's just a thrill for me to share it with you. A couple of things I want to mention is I will be sharing some songs. The songs that I will be sharing with you are songs that are period songs or very close to it. And over the course of years, sometimes words get changed here or there. But for the most part, the tunes go way, way back into ancient European times and brought forward in a folk sort of fashion. But I'll be talking a little bit more about that later. But also, I'll be talking about the taverns themselves and what made them work and what their role was in our time. Another technical difficulty. Hold on one moment, please. There we go. When drink is gone into the brain, then out come filthy songs, and scoffing at the best men, yea, at godliness itself in the power of it. Cotton Mathers. In 1673, Increase Mathers penned, "Woe to the drunkards! Wine is from God, but the drunkard is from the devil." 3 jolly coachmen sat in an English tavern. 3 jolly coachmen sat in an English tavern. And they decided to have another flagon. Oh, landlord, fill the flowing bowl until it doth run over. Landlord, fill the flowing bowl until it doth run over. For tonight we'll merry, merry be. For tonight we'll merry, merry be. For tonight we'll merry, merry be. For tomorrow we'll be sober. Here's to the man who drinks strong ale and goes to bed quite mellow. Here's to the man who drinks strong ale and goes to bed quite mellow. He lives as he ought to live. He lives as he ought to live. He lives as he ought to live. And as a jolly good fellow, landlord, fill the flowing bowl until it doth run over. Landlord, fill the flowing bowl until it doth run over. For tonight we'll merry, merry be. For tonight we'll merry, merry be. For tonight we'll merry, merry be. For tomorrow we'll be sober. And here's to the maid who steals a kiss and stays to steal another. Here's to the maid who steals a kiss and stays to steal another. She's a boon to all mankind. She's a boon to all mankind. She's a boon to all mankind. For soon she'll be your mother. Oh, landlord, fill the flowing bowl until it doth run over. Landlord, fill the flowing bowl until it doth run over. For tonight we'll merry, merry be. For tonight we'll merry, merry be. For tonight we'll merry, merry be. For tomorrow we'll be sober. I want to make a quick note here about the verses in the songs. Almost every song I'm going to sing with you tonight. 2 things. One, I have minimized the verses so that we could have even more songs, because every one of these songs has many, many verses. And I've cut them way back to just 2 or 3 perhaps. The other thing I wanted to point out is that in these songs, many of them, you'll see sections that are bold-face print. So they're most likely the chorus part of the song. So tonight, I want you to pretend that you were singing in the shower. Now it's the same thing because all your microphones have been muted and no one can hear you but you. So have some fun with me tonight. Sing along if you will. Most of these things are somewhat repetitive, so I'm sure you can pick them up. Upon all the new settlements the Spaniards make, the first thing they do is build a church. The first thing ye Dutch do upon a new colony is to build them a fort. But the first thing ye English do, be it in the most remote part of ye world or amongst the most barbarous Indians, is to set up a tavern or a drinking house. Now since we've met, let's merry, merry be, in spite of all our foes. And he that will not merry, merry be, we'll pull him by the nose. Let him be merry, merry, merry there, while we're all merry, merry here. For who can know where he shall go? To be merry another year, brave boys, to be merry another year. And he that will not merry, merry be, with a generous bowl and toast, may he in bridewell be shut up, and fast bound to a post. Let him be merry, merry, merry there, while we're all merry, merry here. For who can know where he shall go? To be merry another year, brave boys, to be merry another year. And he that will not merry, merry be, with a company of jolly boys, may he be plagued with a scolding wife, to confound him with her noise. Let him be merry, merry, merry there, while we're all merry, merry here. For who can know where he shall go? To be merry another year, brave boys, to be merry another year. So, what actually was a tavern? Let's get into this a little bit. Well, you've often heard the expression room and board. It was a place you could get room and board. In early colonial taverns, what this really meant, room meant you got some space under a roof to sleep overnight under a roof, but not necessarily did you get a bed. And you would also get a seat at the dining table, which was usually just a large board. So you have the room and board. Now today, room we think of is your own private chamber. In those days, room simply meant space. But a tavern was many, many things in town. It could be a stop on a stagecoach route. Now the Wolf Tavern in Newburyport was one such tavern. It could be a post office. It was an official place where post or mail could actually be sent and received from or to. It was just a general meeting place for organizations, clubs, special events. It could be a courtroom, and other governmental meetings could be held here, particularly in the winter time. Rather than heating up the whole meeting house, if you had one, you could go to a tavern and that place was nice and warm and toasty 24/7. It could be a church. Any congregation or a preacher could avail themselves of the space if and when needed, perhaps for the same reason. It could be a place for news and gossip, for sure. The local newspaper was sometimes read out loud here. It was a place to advertise, like a lost object or items for sale, items wanted. It could be a place, of course, where you could buy a drink. Unfortunately, trafficking in human beings might also go on in taverns. Advertisements appeared regularly in very early Boston newspapers announcing the sale of servants and slaves, most of whom were sold from the city's taverns. Now this power over the tavern and the behavior of individuals kept the public coffers full from the fees and the bonds that were paid by the tavern keepers and the imposition of an excise tax on liquor. And it served to promote local manufacture and to contribute to the public pot. In other words, it was an important revenue stream for the town. Now, not just anyone could have a tavern. Remember, a tavern was a privately owned but licensed public space. Think about that. It's a little bit different than what we're used to today. Privately owned, but a licensed public space. So if you in your home wanted to turn it into a tavern, you could do that, but only after going through a quite strict process. And there were three main steps to this licensing process. The first and most important step in the process involved obtaining community approval, usually through the documented approval of the town of the Board of Selectmen. Second, the potential tavern keepers sought the approval of the provincial government. The government and council, and then the assembly, and after 1742, occasionally justice of the peace, they would justify the need for a tavern in a particular location. The third step, tavern keepers had to post a significant bond with sureties guaranteeing adherence to all of the local laws governing liquor, especially those covering the payment of excise taxes and the need to keep order. Now, colonial lawmakers were playing a very delicate balance. Remember, these are Puritan times, and the religious leaders were the most important leaders in town. They needed to be kept happy, but the people needed to be kept happy too, and they had a certain set of needs. They had a need, first and foremost, to have a place to sleep. And by that I mean, remember, in those days there was no mass transportation. Individuals did not have freedom of transportation like we have today, where we can just jump in our own personal horseless carriage and go pretty much anywhere we like. In those days, it was how far can you walk in a day. Now, you might have a horse, a draft horse, that might pull a wagon, or perhaps an ox pulling a wagon that you could ride from place to place, but generally people walked. So first need is a place to sleep. So the taverns, and the need for a tavern in a particular location, it would be at an intersection or on a main road, because it was first and foremost a place for travelers to be able to stop for food and to stay overnight if needed. But at the same time, the locals would also use the taverns as a place for everything else, as I mentioned on an earlier slide, where it might be a post office, a meeting house, a church, a courtroom. It could be just about everything. That was for the local folks. And of course, they were often looking for something to eat and, of course, something to drink. So the whole time, the lawmakers tried to draw a delicate balance between keeping control over people's public behavior. In other words, not getting drunk too much, but also keeping them happy enough to patronize the tavern so that the tavern keeper could make money, so the tavern keeper could pay the town taxes. So it was a very delicate balancing act. The services, taverns were required to have good, wholesome, and cleanly lodging and diet for travelers, and stable, fodder, and corn or pasturage and corn for their horses. Now, if you decided to stay overnight in this tavern, you would have a choice of rates. And that was determined whether you were willing to share a bed, and if so, with how many people. Would you rather sleep on the floor, or would you rather sleep on the bed? Would you rather have a blanket or not? Would you mind if there were 5 other men in the same room with you? Fine. At this point, I want to point out that taverns were primarily for men. Lodging, however, if you were traveling as a family or as a couple, man and wife, you would be given your own room. But if you were a single male, as was quite often the case, you would most likely be sharing your room with other people that you had never seen before. Now, how about women? Well, you may be surprised to find out that anywhere from 1 to almost 20% of all rural taverns were run by women, while women ran 14 to 55% of taverns in colonial port cities. In 1758, Portsmouth, New Hampshire was allowed 8 taverns in the provincial legislative records, and had at least 3 female-run taverns. Now, while the same records show that in the same year, Stratham, New Hampshire had 2 legally sanctioned taverns, both were owned by women. Now, women appear to have owned and operated a high percentage of the known 18th century New Hampshire taverns, and I'm sure the same would be true just south of there, of course, here in Newburyport. Anywhere from 20% on up. By law and by their licenses, women were the voice and the source of authority within their taverns. Licensors expected that tavern keepers, regardless of their sex, were to be obeyed by all clientele, and that keepers would control their clientele with their own authority. So these women would need to be strong, assertive women that could take charge. So here's a little song that's actually one of two things. It can be sung as a toast, as I have here, but it was also part of another song that I decided not to do tonight. So this is the one that could be served as a toast. Now, toasting was very, very popular. So here they are saluting the women. Now harvest is over and supper is past. Here's a health to our mistress, all in a full glass. For she's a good woman and provides us good cheer. Here's a health to our mistress, so drink a fee beer. Here's to the maiden of bashful 15. Here's to the widow of 50. Here's to the flaunting, extravagant queen. And here's to the housewife that's thrifty. Let the toast pass, drink to the lass. A warrant she'll prove an excuse for the glass. Let the toast pass, drink to the lass. A warrant she'll prove an excuse for the glass. Here's to the charmer whose dimples we prize. Here's to the maid who has none, sir. Here's to the girl with a pair of blue eyes. And here's to the nymph with but one, sir. Let the toast pass, drink to the lass. A warrant she'll prove an excuse for the glass. Let the toast pass, drink to the lass. I warrant she'll prove an excuse for the glass. Now, before I go on, I want to point out that women were not hardly ever seen by themselves in a tavern. Very rarely. Now, women might be running the tavern. Women might be working in the tavern, namely the daughters of the owners. But if you're a single woman in a tavern, you would end up with an immediate bad reputation for obvious reasons in those days. So who else, or who could be excluded in those days? Well, in Boston, they prohibited the selling of liquor to any, quote, any Indian, Negro, or mulatto servant or slave, unless sent by his master. In Massachusetts, tavern and alehouse keepers were prohibited from allowing traveling salesmen to lodge or receive entertainment. And that was to protect the local community members, the livelihood of the local folks. Traveling salesmen were not looked highly upon because they were competition. Now, we're in Newburyport, so we need to talk about mariners, don't we? I need to make a slight adjustment here, excuse me. Mariners constituted between 10 and 25% of the adult male population in colonial seaports. Mariners who were under contract to a ship could not be served without license from their respective masters or their captains. The latter could partake of tavern fare. Now in 1751, a law recognized that after weeks at sea, mariners stumbled into the first tavern that they saw. Of course, they were eager for the first dram, the company of women, and food that had not been stored aboard ship. The new legislation made it unlawful for tavern keepers to entertain any mariners or seamen for more than 1 hour out of 24. Now, I might point out here a little bit that a mariner, a sailor, a common sailor, would never be caught. I shouldn't say never be caught, but he most likely would not wear a tricorn hat on board ship. More likely he would have a cap like this. And the reasons for a cap like this is the tricorn hat is much more easily blown off by the wind, or also easily caught with all of the lines in the rigging around the ship and knock your hat off. if you're climbing up in the rigging, of course, you don't want to be worrying about your hat. So they would wear something that would look a little more like this. They might also be wearing a short coat. The coat I'm happen to be wearing tonight is a long coat. It goes down to mid-thigh, but sailors would probably be dressed in their waistcoat, perhaps, or even in their shirt sleeves, which would be quite common as well. So here's a favorite song for mariners, by mariners, to mariners. Ye mariners all, as ye pass by, come in and drink if you are dry. Come spend me lads your money brisk, and pop your nose in a jug of this. Ye mariners all, if you've half a crown, you're welcome all to sit down. Come spend me lads your money brisk, and pop your nose in a jug of this. Oh, now I'm old and can scarcely crawl. I've a long grey beard and a head that's bald. Crown my desire and fulfill my bliss, a pretty girl and a jug of this. And when I'm in my grave and dead, and all my sorrows are past and fled, transform me then into a fish, and let me swim in a jug of this. You gentlemen of England who live at home at ease, how little do you dream about the dangers of the seas. Give ear unto us mariners, we will plainly show all our fears and our cares, when the stormy winds do blow. A sailor must have courage, no danger must he shun. In every kind of weather still his course he has to run. Now mounted on the high topmast, how dreadful 'tis below. Then we ride with the tide while the stormy winds do blow. Then we ride with the tide while the stormy winds do blow. But when the danger's over and safe we come on shore, the horrors of the tempest, we'll think of them no more. For the flowing bowl invites us, and joyfully we go. All the day we drink away, though the stormy winds do blow. All the day we drink away, though the stormy winds do blow. So what was entertainment like in the taverns? Well, just about anything you can imagine went on in the taverns. It's not all that different from many places you may go today where they have different forms of entertainment, but seldom would you see such a variety of entertainment. So one thing that was very common for entertainment in the tavern were games, all different kinds of games. There were games with marbles, and there were certainly many games with dice, where they would draw lots or throw dice, and what I'm talking about is gambling. Lots and lots of gambling. Even cockfighting was quite popular in the early colonies there at the taverns. Now, how about shows? I mean, in some places you go, they might have like a little dinner theater kind of thing. Did they have that sort of thing in colonial taverns? Well, yes and no. Did they have Shakespeare? Well, of course, Shakespeare was being performed in London. And if you were quite wealthy, you might see a performance of Shakespeare by a Shakespearean troupe. If you were living in a place like Philadelphia or New York, while under British occupation, of course, during the Revolution. But you would not find it in a common tavern for sure. And the same is true for opera. The same is true for symphonic music. There were, however, traveling troupes and traveling musicians, so you might find a very small group who might do a small section of a Shakespearean play, or a section of an opera, or be a classical musician perhaps. But it would not be a concert hall like that. All right. Trained animals, yes. If you had a trained raccoon and you wanted to make a little money on the side, you could advertise yourself, go to the tavern, and people would throw money in a hat for you and your raccoon. Of course, there were lectures could be given there by religious people, by authors, by any expert, and of course politicians were always giving lectures or speeches perhaps there. Now, again, looking at the music, this was the classical period in music. This was the time of Haydn, Beethoven, and Mozart. So many of the songs might have been, some of the songs were actually written by some of those composers, but the words were quite often different because some of the songs that were coming in were folk songs and they were mingled in with perhaps a classical song here or there, unless you were one of those traveling trained musicians, which was quite rare unless you got away from the big cities. How about different instruments? Well, in those days, the harpsichord and the piano, particularly the piano, was the instrument of choice, but you needed to be wealthy. You needed to have a nice place to have it and keep it and play it. So if it was not in a concert hall, it would be in your very elegant sitting parlor, perhaps, of your mansion if you were a very wealthy person. So a person perhaps maybe in Newburyport could have had a piano or even perhaps a harpsichord, but you would not see that in a tavern. What you need are smaller instruments, instruments that can travel. And a glass harmonica is another one that does not fit into that category. A glass harmonica is the instrument that was invented by Benjamin Franklin. It's a group of nested bowls that have a hole through the bottom of them, and they are rotated. And just like you have a crystal glass on your dining room table, and you wet your finger, and you make it ring with your wet finger around the top of the glass. Well, Benjamin Franklin witnessed this when he was over in Asia, and he came back and said, you know, I can do better than that. I'm going to take these crystal glasses and have a glass blower tune each one to a different pitch just right. I'm going to paint them different colors so I know which one is which. Put a rod through the middle, rotate them, and now I can actually play harmony because I can play 2 or 3 notes at the same time. But you would not see that in a tavern, so I digress. Would you see a violin? Absolutely you would see a violin. You would see something called a pochette violin. You would also see lute and or guitar. You might see a dulcimer, either a standard dulcimer or a zither, or a hammered dulcimer, and of course flute would be the wind instrument of choice. These are all instruments that can be played indoors, as you know, without too much damage to your ears. For example, you would not play the fife indoors, just like you usually don't play the bagpipes, for example, indoors. Those are outdoor instruments, and they were intended to be loud for martial reasons and parades and such. So you would not see a fife or bagpipe or something like that in a tavern, but there was different types of wind instruments. I'm going to show you a couple of those in a moment. But the most important thing, and what you did see most often, was singing. All right, so here's the violin. On the left, 18th century violin. On the right is a 18th century tavern in Williamsburg, Virginia, being played by a more contemporary violinist, or you might call him a fiddler. And on the right-hand side is, in the larger taverns, they actually had what was called a fiddler's throne. It was a special seat. It was like a bandstand, only for one. And you can see the little seat up near the top there, where the fiddler would sit and he would play fiddle tunes all night. On the left, you can see a flute on the table, and you also see a pochette violin. Now I'm also holding a pochette violin, so you can see exactly how big they are. This is only about 17 inches, should stand over here, 17 inches long. And a pochette violin is not held up to the chin because it's too small. You hold it in the crook of your elbow. And it is bowed with a violin bow as a regular violin would be played, and it is played the same way as a regular violin. But it is a miniature violin. This is the real deal. They had violins like this back in the 18th century. And again, they were called pochette violins because in the French language, pochette means pocket. These were made big enough to fit in the very large coat pockets of the men or a saddlebag of a horse, a traveling musician. Sometimes tavern keepers would actually have a musical instrument or two there in the tavern so that anybody who came in, if they didn't have their own musical instrument but they did know how to play, they could ask the tavern keeper, "May I use your instrument?" And he would have one for them. Also on that table is a type of flute. Also there were recorders and there were whistles. Now whistles, the small tin whistles, could be played indoors. Even though they're a little bit Spartan to the ear, they're still not so loud. These little penny whistles, they can be played very sweetly. Recorders, of course, and flutes in those days were made out of wood, not metal. They were made out of wood, so they had a very nice mellow sound. So those would be the wind instruments. Now in the upper right hand corner you have a hammered dulcimer. A dulcimer is another stringed instrument. String instruments were the thing in those days, and actually right through till today string instruments still seem to be the instrument of choice, particularly in the guitar world, in the folk music and the contemporary music. If you don't have a guitar, you're kind of out of luck. Anyway, this is a dulcimer, multi-strings, but it is played by striking the strings with these little hook-shaped mallets. Now there's another type of, let me go back again. There's another type of dulcimer, also known as a zither, that looks like this. And this you play by sitting down and you rest it on your knees or your thighs. There are 4 strings, and the 3 bottom strings are all strung in such a way that you have a natural harmony of a chord, usually a root, a fifth, and an octave. And then you have another a root, a tonic, if you will, and it is that string. You play that one string with the melody as you strum the whole instrument, giving you a chordal background to your one-string melody. So this is a zither or a dulcimer, also a wooden, hollow stringed instrument. Now on the left here you see a lute. Lutes go way, way back in time, have an incredible history of evolution as they go through time. And you notice they're the 2 basic characteristics of a lute. One is the shape of what they call the resonator, the big box. It's kind of almond shaped, but the back of it is very, very rounded. On the right hand side you see the guitar as we know it today. The difference is that in those days, 18th century, the guitar is actually quite a bit smaller than the guitar that we're familiar with today. Then there is, and I don't have it here to show you, there is a combination of the 2 instruments, and that's where you have the rounded or almond-shaped resonator with the straight fretboard of a guitar. Those came about pretty much in the 20th century, known as the German lute, but it was a sort of a natural evolution of the instrument. Now, and something else that was very, very common in taverns back in the day was a tavern pipe, and I'm sure many of you have heard or seen about tavern pipes. Now, the history of tobacco and the smoking of tobacco really is a North American prize here. This is something that goes way back. Archaeologists have traced it back to almost 1400 BC to 1000 BC. When Christopher Columbus landed in 1492 AD, Christopher Columbus was given tobacco. He took it to Europe and thought that it was healthful. You see the colonists, the Native Americans passed it on to the colonists, and they used it for all types of medical treatments. They used it for spiritual events as well. And they passed that on to Columbus. Columbus took it to Europe, and it became an almost immediate hit. The smoking of tobacco immediately just became extraordinarily popular all across the continent of Europe. And that is what helped, of course, fuel the tobacco trade here in the middle colonies and shipping all of that tobacco over to Europe. Now, it wasn't too long before people began to realize that there may be, or they thought there were some healthful parts to smoking tobacco, but there was also some things that were not so good about smoking tobacco. They noticed two things in particular. People began to develop some types of respiratory problems from smoking tobacco so often, and they also found that people got addicted to smoking tobacco, much in the same way they got addicted to drinking too much alcohol. So as early as 1632, Massachusetts actually passed a state law, a provincial law that should say, making smoking in public illegal. In 1760, a man by the name of Pierre Lorillard established the first company that began processing tobacco to make cigars and snuff. Now, in 1604, King James I of England wrote a treatise, a counterblast to tobacco. Smoking is a custom loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose, harmful to the brain, dangerous to the lungs, and in the black, stinking fume thereof, nearest resembling the horrible Stygian smoke of the pit that is bottomless. Other than that, I think he liked it. All right, so when you smoke one of these clay pipes, any of you who have smoked cigarettes, but particularly if you ever smoked pipes, you know that the inside of the pipe eventually gets gummed up with some very gooey chemicals on the inside. I'm not exactly sure, some tar, I'm sure, or whatever is on the inside, and it's very gooey. So the way to clean out a clay pipe, you had two choices. You could break a tip off it, a piece of it, just break an inch of it off, but now your pipe keeps getting shorter and shorter. Or more commonly, taverns and homes had a little metal rack. You put the metal rack in the fire, you put the pipe in the fire, you basically refire the clay, it burns off all of that nasty stuff on the inside, and you've got a brand new clay pipe. Now, clay pipes came in two sizes. There was your normal, very short pipe, like this. And you can see it's a normal length like this. And it's lily white, brand new, not dirty at all, brand new pipe straight out of the box. Now, if I wanted to read a book, and I'm smoking a pipe like this, two things are going to happen. One, it's going to continue to get in my field of view in front of my book, so I'm going to have to keep adjusting this pipe. Second of all, the smoke from the pipe is most likely to get in my eyes, and my eyes are going to start to water and itch. Not a good thing. So if you ever wondered why this pipe was invented, we now know it today, as you see in the picture there, as a tavern pipe, but it was also known as a reading pipe. Now, those colonists were the most practical, utilitarian people I ever discovered. Amazing people. So if they had a problem with smoke getting in their eyes or getting in front of their field of view to read, they simply extended the pipe to a point where it was out of the way and it didn't sting the eye and didn't get in your way. Now, that being the case, and how you have to put the clay pipe in the fire to clean it out, think of this. You're under Puritan rule. Puritans never would miss a chance for a good metaphor. Tobacco's but an Indian weed. It grows green at morn, cut down at eve. Shows our decay, we are but clay. Think of this when you smoke tobacco. The pipe that is so lily white, wherein so many take delight, is broke with a touch. Man's life is such. Think of this when you smoke tobacco. The pipe that is so foul within shows how man's soul is stained with sin. And then the fire it doth require. Think of this when you smoke tobacco. That song came out of a hymnal in 1670. So we've talked about everything except drinking. Let's talk about that for a bit. Colonial Americans, at least many of them, not necessarily all, believed that alcohol could cure the sick, strengthen the weak, enliven the aged, and generally make the world a better place. They tippled, toasted, sipped, slurped, quaffed, and guzzled from dawn until dark. Now, many started the day with a pick-me-up, and then maybe a mid-morning whistle wetter, and then you're ready for a luncheon libation, then an afternoon accompaniment, a supper snort, perhaps several rounds at a tavern, and of course ended the day with a put-me-down. Now, if colonists indulged too much, they had dozens of words to describe drunkenness. Benjamin Franklin collected more than 200 such terms, including, and they're alphabetical, so you can see how I've only mentioned a few here: addled, afflicted, biggie, boozy, busky, buzzy, tyrannical, cracked, and halfway to conquered. Now, Americans thought alcohol was helpful. To their minds, drink kept people warm, it aided digestion, increased their strength. Sometimes I think some of those things we still believe today. Perhaps some of them are true. Not only did alcohol prevent health problems, but it could cure or at least mitigate them. Now, water, on the other hand, can make you sick. Though the New World had plenty of fresh, unspoiled water, incautious Americans sickened and sometimes died by drinking from polluted sources. I remember in the 18th century they had no idea about germs and bacteria and what made you sick and what didn't. So it was basically trial and error. So if they drank water and it made you sick, then there was something wrong with the water. We can't drink it anymore. They didn't think about where the water had come from. That came about. Also remember, they were all English descendants, and the water in Europe was bad because almost all of it was polluted. So in Europe, children were brought up on drinking alcohol called small beer. Colonists in their home would very often brew their own beer, and they would water it down for the children, usually at least 50-50. But what they didn't understand, that in the brewing process, you boil the water, which kills the germs. So the beer was healthful, even though it was made with water. But of course, they didn't figure this out until much later, of course. How much did they drink? Well, in 1770, the colonies had more than 140 rum distilleries, making about 4.8 million gallons annually, and that's just rum. That was on top of the 3.78 million gallons that were imported each year. Production was concentrated in the Northeast. Yay! Come all ye bold fellows, give an ear to my song, and we'll sing in the praise of good brandy and rum. Let's lift up your glasses, good cheer is our goal. Bring in the punch ladle, we'll fathom the bowl. We'll fathom the bowl, we'll fathom the bowl. Bring in the punch ladle, we'll fathom the bowl. From France we get brandy, from Jamaica comes rum. Sweet oranges and lemons from Portugal come. But stout beer and cider are England's control. Bring in the punch ladle, we'll fathom the bowl. Now, it's difficult to know just how much rum colonists actually drank in British North America. But one historian estimates that during the 1770s, the average adult male may have consumed as much as 3 pints of rum a week. Now, how about mixed drinks? You know, when you go to a restaurant today and you see the drink menu and you see all those cocktails, and they're all concoctions of different liquors. Well, the colonists had a lot of different liquors too, and they did the exact same thing. We did not invent the cocktail. Colonists were doing it for hundreds of years. Their ingredients were beer, ale, gin, brandy, Medford dark rum, port wine known as sack, bourbon, rye, bitters, and they would mix different liquors together and they get different drinks, as you can see here, and they all had wonderful names, like many of our cocktails today have wonderful names. The Rattle-Skull, the Stonewall, the Bogus, the Blackstrap, the Bombo, the Mimbo, the Whistlebelly, Posset, Syllabub, and some of these, if you glanced at a few of these, you'll notice it wasn't just liquor, but they might throw in an egg. They might throw in an egg and then take a hot poker and stick it in, have some milk or cream in it. They would put sugar, they would put sour beer, all different types of things, and experiment with them. They had the sling, the toddy, the flip, sangaree, the mum, grog, dram, Madeira, and peach brandy. Also, there was applejack. And you can see these people here, men and women alike, drinking in the colonial style. When Venus, the goddess of beauty and love, arose from the froth that swam on the sea, Minerva sprang out of the cranium of Jove, a cold and sullen dame, as most authors agree. But Bacchus, they tell us, that prince of good fellows, was Jupiter's son. Pray attend to my tale, for they who thus chatter mistake quite the matter. He sprang from a barrel of Nottingham ale. Nottingham ale, Nottingham ale, no liquor on earth is like Nottingham ale. Nottingham ale, Nottingham ale, no liquor on earth is like Nottingham ale. You bishops and curates, priests, deacons and vicars, when once you have tasted, you all must agree that Nottingham ale is the best of all liquors, and none understands a good creature like thee. It dispels every vapor, saves pen, ink, and paper. For when you've a mind in your pulpit to rail, it'll open your throats. You may preach without notes, when inspired with a bumper of Nottingham ale. Nottingham ale, Nottingham ale, no liquor on earth is like Nottingham ale. Now the seaport towns. Now when the General Court took direct control over the licensing system of taverns in 1681, it ordered the reduction of the number of public houses in Boston. They had 45 places where you could go to drink, and they reduced it down to 24. Now every other town in the province was allowed to have one, except for the seaport towns of Charlestown, Ipswich, Salem, Gloucester, Lynn, Hingham, and Newbury. Now here's another mariner song, this one about whaling. It was 1754 on March the 17th day. We weighed our anchor to our bow and for Greenland sailed away. Brave boys, for Greenland sailed away. We struck that whale and the line paid out, and he gave one slap of his tail. We lost that boat and 5 good men. We never caught that whale, brave boys. We never caught that whale. Oh, Greenland is a dreadful place, a land that's never green, where there's ice and snow and the whalefish blow and the daylight's seldom seen, brave boys, the daylight's seldom seen. So help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley, way, hey, bully in the alley. Help me, Bob, I'm bully in the alley, bully down in Shinbone Al. Bob means God. Bully means drunk. Shinbone Al was a real alley in several huge seaport towns, one in Bermuda, one in Philadelphia, I believe, and one definitely in New York, all down by the docks. Sally's a girl that I love dearly, way, hey, bully in the alley. Sally's the girl that I splice neatly, bully down in Shinbone Al. Well, I left my Sal and I went to sailing, way, hey, bully in the alley. And on a big ship I went to whaling, bully down in Shinbone Al. Now, how about Newbury itself? Well, how long does it take for a town after it's founded or established to have a tavern? Well, Newbury was founded in 1635. Within the same year, Francis Plummer opened the first licensed tavern in Newbury. Remember, it was important for travelers, not just drinking. John Knight's Tavern in 37, 39, Edmund Greenleaf, Tristram Coffin. You'll notice a lot of big Newburyport names on this list. Henry Somerby in 1650. Now, perhaps you have heard of the Sweat Ilsley House. At one point, as you'll see in a moment, that was also a tavern, the Blue Anchor Tavern. On the left here, you see what is known as the Cage. All liquor was always kept behind bars in what was known as the Cage. But the bars kind of wafted into the name of the shelf where the beer was served to you or to the waitresses, or known as wenches. And here on the right hand side is a cage with bars, and we have, if you don't recognize a couple of these people, we've got Bethany Graff Durow on the right, we have James Durow in center, serving Ipswich Ale, of course, and on the left is Susan Hoffman. Now, the three of them were helping put together Bethany's program called Tales and Ales there in the for historic New England at the Sweat Ilsley House. But here's the colonial garb. Here is the tavern, the cage, and the bar there. 1653, we've got Stephen Sweat, who opened that Blue Anchor Tavern that I mentioned. That's up on High Street there, just past, going south, just past Marlborough Street. 1680, 1685, John March had the tavern down near the ferry over to Carr's Island. 1692, Sargent had a tavern just south of the Custom House Museum. Merrill's Tavern near the Carey Meeting House on Market Square. And the most famous of all the taverns, of course, was Wolfe Tavern in 62. Wolfe Tavern was named after James Wolfe, General James Wolfe of the British Army. Here you see him depicted in the sign that went with the tavern, hand-carved, and it went to, I think there were 4 different locations for Wolfe's Tavern over the years. One was the Tracy Mansion, which is now part of the Newburyport Public Library. But the original one was on Threadneedle Alley, and I think it had a short stint over at the Dalton Club House today, and there was another place right on State Street as well. In 71, we have the Wentworth Arms, and you see it advertised here in the newspaper by Robert Calder. And in these taverns, particularly in the 1770s, there would be lots of politics and patriotic songs being sung in the Patriot taverns, and Old English songs being sung in the Loyalist taverns. And here is one that goes back, that was sung at this time. I'm lonesome since I crossed the hill and oh, the moor and valley. Such heavy thoughts my heart do fill since parting with my Sally. I seek no more the fine and gay for each, but does remind me how swiftly ours did pass away with the girl I left behind me. Oh, ne'er shall I forget the night the stars were bright above me, and gently lent their silvery light when first she vowed to love me. But now I'm bound for Brighton camp, kind heaven favour find me, and send me safely back again to the girl I left behind me. Then Oliver Putnam had a house of entertainment up by the Ilsley House, and we have Poor's Tavern over on Neck Road. Poor's Tavern sign here is held by the Newburyport Marine Society. Ezra Lunt had another tavern one of the innkeepers in Newbury. His inn was on Federal Street. Stephen Emery had one over in what is now West Newbury. Now remember, West Newbury didn't become West Newbury until 1819. So we've got Newbury up to 1764. Then they cut out that little pie-shaped section that we now call Newburyport in 1764. The rest of it was still Newbury. So the town of Newbury started off as being the largest land area town in the colony of Massachusetts, and Newburyport became the smallest by area town in the colony of Massachusetts. But West Newbury didn't start until 1819. So in 1783, it was still part of Newbury. Sawyer's Tavern on Bradford Road. Now, Bradford Road is the same thing as Main Street in West Newbury, Route 113. Brown Spring Farm is still there. It's on the right-hand side, right opposite Garden Street, if you know the area very well. So here I've included this little piece here because many of you know that John Quincy Adams actually spent quite a bit of time in Newburyport while he was studying law. And in his diary in 1788, he wrote, "Between 4 and 5 I received an invitation from Putnam and F. Bradbury to join them for a party at sleighing. Though not particularly desirous to go, I did not refuse, and at about 6 o'clock we started. We went to Sawyer's Tavern, almost 3 miles off, and there danced until between 12 and 1. The company was rather sorted, but the party was agreeable." Now you notice it's sorted with a T, not sordid with a D. So sometimes people get a chuckle at that, but he just meant a lot of different kinds of people there, but he had a good time. So I've got some more things here that kind of fall into the trivia pot. We've talked about grog a little bit. Now grog started out being a Navy drink. It is a kind of a wonderful story about Admiral Vernon back in the War of 1812 and thereabouts. He was the first fellow that actually began to give his sailors a daily ration of rum on a regular schedule. Now it was usually watered down, but the way it became known as grog is this. You see, Admiral Vernon used to have this beautiful waterproof, sort of like a raincoat that he wore, and it was made from a material called grogram, which is a coarse silk and mohair fabric. So they called Admiral Vernon Old Grog after his coat. And then as they began to hand out this drink on a regular daily schedule, every day at a certain time, they'd get their little Jill cup and they'd go up on deck to see grog to get their drink. Well, eventually it just became known as going to go up and get grog. We're going to go up and get the grog. And that tradition stayed within the English Navy for quite some time. Now, every good tavern would always have a little supply of Dr. Bateman's drops. They were always kept on hand. It was an opiate mixed with water and alcohol, and it was a medicinal treatment of diarrhea and cough. So if you're going to serve alcohol to a bunch of people who are going to drink too much of it, it's good to have something to give them when they get sick. Also, you've probably heard of the Scarlet Letter. That was an A for adultery. Well, there was another Scarlet Letter. In 1634, Robert Coles convicted of drunkenness, enticing John Shotwell's wife of inconstancy, and other misdemeanor, and was forced to wear on his back a sign, a sheet of white paper bearing the word drunkard in large letters. A few months later, he was found guilty of being drunk in Roxbury. For this, he was sentenced to be disenfranchised and to wear about his neck and so to hang about his outward garment a D made of red cloth and set upon white, to continue this for a year and not to leave it off at any time when he comes amongst company. Now Coles remained out of court, if not sober, for 2 months, at which point the court reduced his sentence, reversed its sentence. So as pretty much the last song of the evening, where I hope I'm not running too much overtime here for you folks, but this is sort of a goodbye song for sailors. They have left their ship. Their commission is over. They're going to go their separate ways. They'll probably sign on to different ships. So they're saying goodbye to their friends that they have known for many months, perhaps even years, depending on the type of ship and the mission, commission and mission that they were on. So here they are back in port. Safe and sound at home again, let the waters roar, Jack. Safe and sound at home again, let the waters roar, Jack. Long we've tossed on the rolling main, and now we're safe ashore, Jack. Don't forget your old shipmate, folder, older, I know. There she swings an empty hulk, not a soul below now. Number 7 starboard mess, Mrs. Jack and Joe now. Long we've tossed on the rolling main, and now we're safe ashore, Jack. Don't forget your old shipmate, folder, older, I know. But the best of friends must part, fear of foul weather, handy flipper for a shake. Now a drink together. Long we've tossed on the rolling main, now we're safe ashore, Jack. Don't forget your old shipmate, older, I know. I want to thank everyone connected with the Customs House. I particularly want to thank you folks. But we are on Independence Day weekend, so I want to bid you adieu by singing a little bit of Yankee Doodle, who went to town riding on a pony. Stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. Wait a minute. Macaroni? What are you talking about? Macaroni was an Italian. He was I think he was a count, but most of all, he was a fashion icon. He went into the most beautiful clothes, silk, ruffles, feathers, the whole deal, and everybody thought he was the cat's meow. He was the Beau Brummel. He was the icon that everyone looked up to. This song, Yankee Doodle, was sung by British soldiers, where they took an old English tune, they changed the word, and called us doodles, which is not a good thing. We went riding on a pony. That's an embarrassment. That's a small horse. You stuck a feather in a hat, you thought it was pretty fancy. So here we have our Yankee Doodle. At the last battle, it is said that the colonists, the Continental Army, sang this as the British Army passed in review upon their retreat. Yankee Doodle went to town a-riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy. Mind the music and the steps, and with the girls be handy. May have a wonderful, wonderful Independence Day. Get your flag, put it outside. That's what it looked like in 1777. That's the Hopkinson flag. Or perhaps you have one that is known as the Betsy Ross flag, where the 13 stars are in a circle. It doesn't matter. Let's celebrate our history. And I can't thank you enough for joining me tonight. Here's a list of my sources. If you have any questions, I'm going to pass it now over to back to Sean.
Hi, everybody. So, did have a couple of things we were wondering about. If you could talk a little bit about some of the items on the wall there behind you.
I could. On the wall behind me. Well, on this wall I have some Newburyport people. I've got Offen Boardman, I've got Nathaniel Tracy, and I have the revenue cutter, the Pickering, built right here in Newburyport, one of the very first customs ships. And on the other wall, up on top here, I have a, can you see it? I hope you can see it. Okay. This is a Charleville Flintlock Musket. It is not a rifle. Rifle means something very different. This is a smoothbore Flintlock musket made in Charleville, France. It is the weapon that the French supplied the colonists during the Revolution. There were still many of them hanging around from the 7 Years' War or the French and Indian War, whatever you choose to call it. But then in 1777, the French began to sell them or ship them over to the colonists. The weapon underneath that is a blunderbuss. Blunderbuss was used by two people, or two types of people, I should say. One would be the person who rode what we call shotgun on a coach, on like a stagecoach. Or if you were on a ship, it was a weapon that you would keep foreign enemy troops from boarding your vessel. The weapon on the bottom is a British Navy sea pistol. And my newest piece, and probably my favorite piece, is this is a little officer's pistol. This is a replica from a piece, it's identical to a piece that's in a British museum from the Revolutionary War period. What is important to know about this weapon, and Sean and I were talking about it just a little bit before we went on air tonight, is that it takes a long time to load a flintlock weapon, whether it be a big weapon or a little one, it doesn't matter, it takes a long time. Somewhere, if you're extraordinarily trained and quick, you might do it in about 25 seconds, but it would be more like 30 to 35 seconds to load a weapon. So what that means is that it's a race between you and your enemy who's going to reload first, so you don't want to miss. If you do miss, or you have more than one targets, let's say, what this weapon has is something a little special. And I'm going to hold it so that you can see what happens here. It comes equipped with a bayonet. So you can fire your weapon, and it's on spring-loaded, and now you can also use it as a dagger, if you will. Okay? So those are the items on my wall. Is there anything else, John? Oh!
There we go. More technical difficulties. No, I think that's it for now, but I just want to say thank you very much for your presentation. As always, wonderful job. While I have people kind of captive, I know people were coming in a little bit late on this one. We did have some technical difficulties. I'd just like to reiterate a couple of things about the museum coming up. We will be actually reopening next week, Thursday the 9th, in according with Phase 3 of Massachusetts Phase Reopening Plan. We are going to have modified weekly hours from Thursday through Sunday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Thursday through Saturday, and 12 to 4 on Sunday. Admission to the museum will be now on a timed entry in groups of 6, similar to a historic house tour. And we can now sell admission tickets online through a newly revamped website, which will hopefully be up in the next couple of days. But if you want to go sooner, you can go to tickets.thechmm.org to buy tickets in advance. Newburyport residents are still free with an ID, although we do recommend still that you go and get tickets in advance to make sure you can get a spot. I think that's it from us here. So thank you very much. Have a great 4th of July. Have a pint or 4.
Huzzah!
Huzzah!